Hello and welcome to the LightBringers Stories of Divine Love. Today we're with Jeanne Fike and we'll hear about her journey. Today is Monday, March 29th, 2021. I'm Lorraine Borchers in Independence, Oregon today, and with me are two friends, Beth and Yvonne.
Hi, I'm Yvonne and I'm from Central Pennsylvania.
Hi, I'm Beth and I come from Lincolnshire in the UK. So before we start, shall we have a prayer?
Let's.
Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us here together to explore Jeanne's divine love journey. We're so grateful for your gift of unconditional love and hope these faith journeys will encourage others to reach out to you, dear Father, so they may come to know of the love and light, peace and joy you give to all your children who seek for it. We love you, Father. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Beth. Love and light, peace and joy. I love it. So, Jeanne, we are delighted that you're here. If you would introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about where you live perhaps, and then go into your story. We are excited to listen.
Well, I'm really excited to be here. I live in Gibsons, BC, Canada, on the West Coast. And I just want to thank you. You are each very dear to me. And for initiating this wonderful project, I've watched every interview, and what a heartwarming opportunity it's been for me to reflect on my own life, my own spiritual path, and all my blessings. I just hope I can make it through without copious tears, because the angels have been very close and all the memories of my life have been flooding me, and I just feel so blessed. And so thank you very much for this opportunity. My first recollections of feeling God's love began when I was about 8 years old. I used to call it the flash. The flash would come when I was lying in bed, and if I really yearned for it, it would come and envelop me with love, leaving me with a feeling of awe and wonder, with a feeling of warm expansion and contentment, like I was part of something greater than myself. So even now, as an adult, when I feel out of touch with my soul, I have only to think about this experience to feel a connection with my soul. Our family was not a religious family, so I wasn't introduced to the idea of prayer. But when I visited my cousin every summer, my aunt would say a prayer with us when she tucked us into bed. And just like when the flash came, I loved it. That wonderful love would descend upon us. And it wasn't until many years later that I realized the angels must have been with me, praying with me. My parents met in the Navy during the Second World War. My mother was a nurse's aide. My father was a lieutenant and a decorated hero for risking his life to save his warship from a pending explosion. My parents were frugal, honest, and hardworking. They were devoted to friends and family and were very well known for their hospitality. I grew up in a home that was always open to travelers, neighbors, and community. No one we knew had babysitters. My parents bundled us all up, 5 kids, and took us everywhere with them. Many evenings were spent sleeping on the floor at their friends' houses, and we just loved it. It was great fun. Dad made root beer for us kids, and adult beer too, donuts and bread, and he took us smelting at all the beaches around Vancouver. He became known as the Bank of Dunbar for helping so many people in need. He was truly a rough diamond. Mom was selfless and nurturing. No one ever left our house hungry. Mom and Dad could make a delicious meal for a big crowd in the blink of an eye. They always stocked a full larder with their homemade canned fish, fruit, and vegetables. No one was ever turned away. We went to drive-in movies on Friday nights and out for a drive on Sundays. In those days, seat belts were not required. Like most families, our extended family had its share of injured souls and family dysfunction. Alcoholism, abuse, drug addictions, rage, depression, distorted thinking, chaos, confusion, and ignorance. Ours was a traditional family with my father the authority. My mother's role was clearly limited to caretaking responsibilities and child rearing, except when there was a need for stronger discipline. I was the second oldest and inherited my father's way of taking charge. My mother was loving and devoted to her 5 children, but in those days it was a man's world. And while she had a nurturing presence, she played a subservient role, never drove a car or worked outside the home. It was always Dad's way or the highway, with control maintained by threats of physical punishment and guilt. I was a determined child and took on the role of helping my mother look after my 3 younger siblings, as well as my older brother, who was a gentle, sensitive soul. I became a people pleaser and found my worth in life by helping others. Especially, I felt a need to try and help people understand and listen to each other. I felt if people could just understand each other, then everything would be all right. And I really wanted to help the grown-ups understand the most. I was convinced as a young child that this was my mission in life, and I always wanted to be a teacher. When I was a teenager, I experienced some kind of a revelation that love is the most important thing. Love is absolutely the most important thing. I remember having conversations with my mother about this truth. I felt very satisfied and certain within myself for being able to explain how important love was with anyone who would listen. I knew my destiny was to put love into action, and I was determined to change the world. I thrived at school. I was always an extrovert and the class clown and in the thick of things. In the 8th grade, the guidance counselor, Mrs. Nelson, became my first mentor outside my family, and I wanted so badly to be just like her. She was a wonderful listener, a wonderful teacher, and the way I felt in her presence was totally accepting and encouraging. I learned that Mrs. Nelson was a feminist. Not that I really understood the meaning of that word, but I did sense that my father would not approve. Mrs. Nelson introduced us to all the feminist popular literature, and I devoured those books. Betty Friedan, Gloria Steinem, everything I could get my hands on. I embraced the movement for justice, equality, the civil rights movement, and women's liberation. I marched in every peace march with hundreds of thousands of others in Vancouver. When I was 18, the students in the Vancouver area all marched against the testing of nuclear bombs in Amchitka, Alaska, and we even closed down the border between Canada and the United States. That was the first time since the War of 1812. I've always been steadfast in advocating for peace and justice for all, especially for vulnerable populations and the disadvantaged. My father, who worked as a stevedore on the Vancouver waterfront, brought home captains and ship's officers from all over the world, and thus began my love for cultural diversity. This was during the Cold War between Russia and the United States, and I was particularly drawn to try and understand those terrible politics. Out of those interests, I developed a passion for traveling the world, and the first overseas trip I took on my own was to Russia and to Eastern Europe, behind the Iron Curtain. When I turned 18 and graduated from high school, I was drawn to study the cultures of First Nations people in our province. At the opening of a new museum of anthropology at the University of BC, I met Dr. and Mrs. Daniel Samuels of the Foundation Church of the New Birth, who told me about divine love. We stayed in touch for a few years, and while my soul was hungry for the truths of the love I felt when I was with them, my mind was still resistant. I decided to take a year off to work after my third year of university, and without consciously realizing at the time, I was being guided to take a job in a new leadership program offered by the Bank of Montreal. I was 21, and there I met my spiritual mentor, Ellie, my very own angel on earth, who God sent to lead me to the truths of his love. I was so drawn to Ellie that I wanted to spend every minute with her. I felt loved, accepted, inspired, and joyful in her presence, but I really didn't understand why. In time, I came to understand that Ellie was being used as a channel of God's love and was an instrument being used by the angels. She always listened with her heart and never judged or criticized my lifestyle. And then came a night that changed my life. Ellie had given me a book to read, Life in the World Unseen by Anthony Borgia, and invited me over to discuss it. Borgia's book is a classic describing the spiritual spheres. Even though Ellie was the same age as my mother, my longing to be with her was so intense, I turned down invitations to be with my friends. And after dinner, we sat in the living room and Ellie said a prayer. I watched Ellie go into a trance. Although I had no idea about spiritual gifts or what was happening, her facial features began to change. She had her eyes closed and she was smiling and blissful. The power of love in her home was so strong, I was lifted up and embraced by what I thought later could only have been the Holy Spirit. That loving presence embraced me completely. My body, my mind, my spirit, and my soul with such intensity, it was like a spiritual release in golden light, causing a well of wretched energy, terror, self-loathing, shame, all that needed to be expunged and was coming up to the surface of my consciousness. At the same time I was experiencing this agony, I was also experiencing an ecstasy, like every part of my being was exploding into a brilliant light. For days afterwards, I could hardly engage with the world and cried tears of joy with the release. This intense experience really did change me forever and change the course of my life. I desperately wanted to share this experience with others, and I talked about the Paget messages and my experiences to anyone who would listen. Ellie was an exceptional divine love medium. That night, when Ellie went into trance, Andrew spoke to me and said, "You will come to know God, who is a stranger to you now." 5 years later, I found out that Andrew was Al's lifelong guide. And Ellie channeled a second message from Alec Gaunt, who had only recently passed over. And Alex said, "The world needs more Jeannes." Those simple words touched the wretchedness of my being and igniting a feeling of worthiness like I had never experienced before. And I began to see auras and spiritual energies and the presence of the angels strongly with me at all times, wherever I went. For the next 5 years, I shadowed Ellie at every opportunity. We worked together and we prayed together unceasingly. We read the Paget messages over and over again. I was so hungry to learn everything I could about the spiritual laws. It was a glorious time, which I think of as my divine love internship. When I was 23, I left the bank and was guided to find a job as a travel agent with an exciting new Canadian charter airline called Wardair. Young and single, I traveled to England, Wales, Scotland, behind the Iron Curtain, to Russia, to East and West Germany, Poland, Belgium, Holland, Japan, Hong Kong, and Hawaii. These adventures ignited a fire within me to travel the world. I also completed my undergraduate degree in education and social services at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. Every class started with a prayer at that university. What a shift from what I had experienced at the University of BC. At the end of August in 1975, Ellie took me to another Divine Love Circle, and that's where I met Terry, Barb, and Al, the love of my life. When I came back home for the Christmas break, Al and I had a whirlwind romance with the angels nudging us together and laughing joyfully. Barbara, who had been mentoring Al, was also an exceptional divine love medium, and at a circle in her home, she channeled a message and a blessing for me from Mother Mary. Mary placed a wedding veil on my head and told me that she was with me as my guide. 10 months later, Al and I were married, and thus began our amazing spiritual adventures together. We had a hippie kind of a wedding outside on a bluff in Stanley Park overlooking the ocean. The angels were very close. My sisters were my bridesmaids, and we had a free flight to Hawaii, compliments of Wardair, for our honeymoon. Al likes to joke that he only married me for the free flights. Al and I have been married 45 years now. We've raised 2 sons and adopted a granddaughter from the downtown east side. We are happy grandparents of a 16-month-old busy toddler, our grandson, Jacob. Al and I continue to meet weekly with Barb and Terry, later my sister Judy, and a small group of friends dedicated to praying for divine love. This weekly group helps sustain us for over 45 years and is still meeting to this day. Having my precious sister Judy and my beloved Al to walk the divine path together is the greatest blessing. I cannot believe how God has blessed me so deeply. Our parents in spirit are on the divine path. Our sons and extended family members are all open to the truths, and we know God holds us all in his embrace. I've been blessed with extraordinary opportunities, wonderful friends, families, and mentors. I am deeply grateful for a career building a nonprofit organization whose mission was to work with vulnerable populations, the homeless, immigrants and refugees, battered women, abused children, pregnant and parenting teenagers, those living in poverty, in desperate circumstances and isolation. With Al as my strongest supporter, God and the angels showing me the way, Burnaby Family Life was based on those same principles that shaped me in my formative years: equality and justice for all, non-judgmental programs based on loving compassion, personal and practical supports. The highlight of my career was working with immigrants and refugees from war-torn countries, struggling to learn English and find their way in a new culture and a new country. I love doing advocacy work and pursued the business community and influential leaders, politicians at every level of government and every political stripe to try and inspire them to help the disadvantaged. Al and I had our struggles as a young couple with very different perceptions of the world and very different personalities, but God always guided us to the help and resources we needed to overcome ourselves. We were led to many cathartic personal development opportunities that, combined with our commitment to daily prayers for divine love, helped us release unloving and dysfunctional parts within ourselves and strengthen our marriage. We both came into our marriage having a strong faith and soulful commitment to serve God. And we love to travel. Every year, Al did all the research, and we would travel to exotic places in Europe, Asia, Central and South America, Mexico, across Canada and the United States. We returned to Hawaii 18 times, thanks to generous friends who exchanged visits with us in Canada. We've traveled to more than 70 countries, each trip an amazing spiritual adventure. In addition to our Monday night circles at Barb's, Al and I hosted a healing circle in our Vancouver home. Al's gifts as a trance medium opened up in his mid-50s, and then we found ourselves being led to host workshops and circles of light in Australia, Hawaii, South America, England, Germany, Serbia, Namibia, and South Africa. Countless road trips and different locations in the US, as well as global retreats at our home in Gibsons. They were healing circles, First Nation circles, circles to exercise dark spirit attachments. All have taught us many lessons and strengthened our commitment to the divine path and trusting in God's guidance and help from the angels. At the turn of the century, Al and I began to plan for our retirement, and in 2003, we bought a beautiful home in a small seaside neighborhood called Grantham's Landing, a 20-minute walk through the forest to a scenic village called Gibsons. Our blessed sanctuary was just a 40-minute ferry ride from the hustle and bustle of the big city and our demanding jobs. What a blessing to be surrounded by nature, wildlife, and a magnificent view of the coastal mountains, the ocean, and the islands. Al poured his creative energy into remodeling the house and the garden. He built a ground floor suite and a garden guest house to host family and friends to gather with us for Divine Love retreats. In 2012, we hosted our first international Divine Love retreat. What started out with the expectation of an intimate retreat with 5 guests, we were completely overwhelmed when we began to receive inquiries from all over the world. The circle of 5 grew into a gathering of more than 35 guests. Once the word got out through various networks, we received requests from as far away as Jeff Cutler in Sydney, Australia, and Helgi Merker in Namibia. Others came from Hawaii, Washington State, California, Florida, New York, BC, and Alberta. We became friends with Elizabeth Morana of FCNB, the Foundation Church of the New Birth, and Michael Nedball and his wife, Carolyn Stokes, from the Foundation Church of Divine Truth. Hosting this retreat opened the way for us to develop relationships with others who were also devoted to the Divine Love path. Deeply profound relationships that we treasure and we know will last forever. As soon as the retreat was over, Jeff Cutler set us up with a forum so that we could all stay connected and support each other on our journeys. Al and I were deeply humbled by the enthusiastic response and created a nonprofit society called the Divine Love Sanctuary Foundation, with the mission to awaken humankind to the wonders of divine love and to be channels of love, peace, and healing for our planet. The DLSF purpose is to facilitate gatherings across the globe in prayer, healing, and learning about the spiritual practice of receiving divine love. With help from Jeff and wonderful friends, next came a website to host the forum and provide support for various projects and initiatives, including Helgi's Children's Sanctuary Namibia projects, feeding AIDS orphan children, the sick, and the elderly in Namibia. Both Jeff and Helgi were founding members of DLSF, along with my dear sister Judy and beloved friends Terry Adler, Betty Owen, and Jane Gartshore. We did not recruit members, as our goal was to be God-guided and soulful rather than being membership-driven. Still, our network of prayerful supporters continued to grow. Almost every weekend, Al and I hosted spiritual seekers who came to pray with us in community. In the first 6 months after the renovations were completed, we hosted 236 sleepovers. In 2015, DLSF hosted another international retreat, and this time we rented a hotel conference center to accommodate 43 guests from many far-off places. Jeff continued to publish all the messages from celestial angels channeled through Al on his website, newbirth.net. He volunteered his time, energy, and resources to us generously, serving 9 years on the DLSF board and assisting Al in publishing 4 books. Jeff continues to provide us with incredible support. In 2020, after a year of working flat out, often 6 hours a day, Jeff launched a new website called Soul Truth with over 1,500 unique messages from Jesus and celestial angels, including 5 volumes of messages we received over a period of 3 years, sitting in development for the gift of direct voice. Direct voice is a sacred spiritual gift that Divine Love followers in the Vancouver area have been praying for since the 1960s. Direct voice is the physical manifestation of celestial angels in broad daylight without the use of ectoplasm. Jeff continues to work diligently on this site every day, responding to his unique calling that will benefit generations to come, ensuring that the truth of divine love is never lost to the world again. In 2015, Al and I were ordained as ministers of the true gospel of divine truth by the Foundation Church of Divine Truth in Hawaii. Around this time, our beloved friend and neighbor of over 30 years, Lorna Scott, became deeply involved with the First United Spiritualist Church, and she was intent on having Al and I give a talk on divine love and participate in their services. Our first opportunity came when Al and I were invited to speak at Lorna's celebration of life. No one was more surprised than us when Al channeled a message from Lorna during the service. This was a contradiction, a break from our own rule to only work with and channel celestial angels. Indeed, Lorna knew the rule, as she had been sitting with us for over 30 years. And when she spoke, she told everyone gathered there that she was no angel. Lorna had passed over into the third sphere and is well on her way to becoming celestial. She was very well known and loved by the church, and hearing from her so soon after her passing was indeed an exceptional gift to us all. Thus, invitations began from the Spiritualist Church to speak once a month at their Sunday services and offer healing to anyone in need after a demonstration of divine love mediumship. The following year, Al, Raphael Legros, Darlene Gaunt, and Ellen Hoven, all devoted divine love followers, were all elected to the board. I was providing consultation in organizational development and did my best to introduce the team and win the support of the voting members. We hosted board strategic planning sessions in our home, weekend retreats, and even 2 divine love retreats in Hawaii, with many from the church attending these intensive experiences. Our presentations and workshops at the church include such topics as divine love, the soul, expiation, the challenges of living a heart-centered spiritual life in a mind-dominated world, faith over fear, the 2 spiritual paths, and divine love mediumship. Deborah Love enhances our services with her amazing songs of love and her powerful voice. Amazing Grace is my personal theme song, and I can't wait to sing in a celestial choir when I pass over. This is getting awfully long. Are you still with me? In 2018, we're getting closer, Brooke Folk, a retired radio announcer, came into our lives. He had been lurking around our website for over a year or 2 and finally introduced himself when he was convinced that celestial angels actually were channeling messages through Al, that it was true. We met Brooke in person at the home of Bill Fraze in Monroeville, Pennsylvania, at a Divine Love retreat. And soon after, Brooke began to sponsor Al and I hosting Circles of Light, a network of dedicated seekers coming together to pray, continue to grow with this outreach. The angels supported these efforts over the wires, as they called it, and we came to understand that soulful, prayerful connections with others around the world are very important and powerful in providing a conduit for God's light, love, and healing to infuse the world. Bill Fraze and Raphael LaGrosse initiated the LightBringers prayer chat line on WhatsApp in 2018, along with its companion group, Divine Love Conversations. Combining that with a Facebook group initiated by Beth Mazer and a Twitter platform initiated by Yvonne Riley, these collaborative efforts on social media supported growing connections amongst Divine Love community worldwide. Indeed, I do feel a part of something greater than myself, just as I did as a young child, but it's taken so many years for my mind to catch up with my soul. When I'm in my soul, I have an incredible feeling, a knowing that God has held me firmly in his grasp all the days of my life, in spite of my willful, mindful self. Last year, Al and I were contacted by Chuck Bloodgood of Austin, Texas, who offered us his support for our work. Weekly conversations with Chuck were initiated, and with the angels' loving support and continued promptings, Lorraine Borchers, right here in front of me, my dear friend, from Bend, Oregon, and our dear Bill Fraze of Monroeville, Pennsylvania, joined the conversations, and an expanded new LightBringers network was born. There is no doubt that the calling received by this small group is not exclusive, but rather a soul calling that reverberates with many souls around the world, each one a unique instrument in God's service, who are also feeling a call to share their unique gifts and talents with each other in an effort to bring more love, more light, and harmony to the world. Facilitating circles of light has been our greatest calling and joy. We are humbled by the loving and prayerful support of a growing Divine Love family who are generously sharing their spiritual gifts in bringing greater light into the world. There is no greater happiness than being in the flow of God's love and in divine service to bring greater light into the world. This is an exciting time to be alive, to be part of the change, the transition of the world from darkness into greater light. As the years pass by, the tyranny of my mind is gradually letting go of control and being replaced by a more constant sense of gratitude and awesome wonder. God's love is gradually dissolving the barriers between us. My faith continues to grow stronger, and my gifts are awakening. Al and I rejoice in retirement. All our needs are being met, and we have the luxury of living each day in the light of God's love. So I thank you for listening to my story. I love you, each one of you. I love you so much. Thank you.
Oh, Jeanne, that's so delightful to hear your story. Thank you so much. I was so impressed that as a teenager, you understood already that love is the most important thing in this world. How mature you were to get that. I mean, that is awesome. And then to put it in action. So thank you. And I'm sure Yvonne and Beth have questions, as do I. So if you have a few more moments to take with us, we'd appreciate that.
Of course, I'd love to.
And your story is so beautiful. You didn't cry, but I had tears in my eyes many times to
Gulp.
feel your connection to God and your angels. It was just so beautiful. And for you to have understood some of that, even as a young child, is just amazing. I think so many of us, we experience things, but as a young child, but we don't quite put it together the way you did. And that is just so very special. What would your suggestions be to someone starting off on the divine love path, to someone that is just beginning to understand everything? I feel like you have such a wealth of knowledge and information, but what would be some of the things that you would suggest to someone starting out that just learned about divine love?
Oh, what an important question. And how do I contribute to? There's so many ways, but I think above all, it would be helpful to really understand the conditions of this harsh, unloving world that we've all been brought into. And I think there's a plague of terrible self-esteem. And to begin with, to try to recognize the love that is in the world. The first guidance that I got with Ellie was to read books on the power of positive thinking and to try to change judgment into compassion. And for the prayer practice, it was to think about, and I think this is why this exercise, doing this interview, is so emotional for me, is to think about all our loved ones. What are the sources of the love in our lives? And if you can remember the good things and the loving people and learn to listen, there's such a plague of people just don't listen to each other. And I think the most healing thing we can do is to listen to somebody else, listen with our hearts, and try not to judge. So, of course, the most important thing is prayer. And I know how hard that is, because it doesn't come easy to many people when you're dealing with the traumas of the world and the conditioning of the world. But absolutely, prayer is the answer to everything. Love is the answer to everything. I don't know if that helps.
Such a beautiful answer, because I don't think people really think of it as looking at trying to think positive. Thinking positive is such a cliche today, just think positive, focus on the positive. But the truth is, when you really focus on the positive of everybody, you start to see things through love. And when you see things through love, it really changes your perception in your mind. That's just a beautiful answer. Thank you so much.
Oh, you said it so eloquently, Yvonne, and that was the way you practice living. I know that about you.
Oh, Jeanne, that was absolutely amazing listening to your story. It's incredible. I knew a little bit about your story before, but the whole listening to it from your experiences as a child is incredible. One of the things that have always, I think, worried me personally is that I get sidetracked onto things very easily. And I wondered if any time in your life you've actually gone down a spiritual path which is different to divine love, and actually my guess is not, but I don't know. It would be really interesting to know how you kept on that path and what your experiences were when you were dispirited or a little bit unsure. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Wow, what an interesting question. I think that it was my soul and God reaching out to me in extraordinary ways that kept me on the divine path. I mean, I've just been so blessed with, imagine having Ellie and my sister Judy reached out to me at a very challenging time in my life when I was estranged from my family. And Judy, 7 years younger than me, was the one who reached out. And she was a young teenager. And so God just kept putting the right people and the opportunities in my path. And I don't know what else to say. I think it was a soul commitment I made before I was born. And I know Al did too, and many others. I am sure each one of you here, we all made commitments before we came to the world to be on this path and to be of service. And so I had the great fortune of the angels just watching over me and blessing me and guiding me and lighting the way.
It seems amazing because that's what comes over is the fact that you are firmly on this path from being a young child, really, and that it continued. And as you say, you have had that help, which is lovely, which is lovely to hear. I'll pass over to somebody else. I'm hogging everything.
Well, I agree that indeed you have been blessed, and it's lovely to hear that. I suspect there are difficulties and challenges still at this time in your life. And I'm wondering how, well, not how, I know you go to God in prayer for that, but life is not all glorious sunshine and flowers. So could you tell us a little bit how you deal with that?
Well, you're right. We have our tests in our family, and some are just too painful to talk about in a public way. And I know you're not asking me
No, I'm
to
not
do that.
No,
Yeah.
not specifics.
But there's no one who escapes in this world from these kinds of tests and challenges. And so I wouldn't trade them for anything, because it is through these painful experiences that we grow. If we turn ourselves to God, then God will always be there, even though, we often don't recognize it at the time. I'm losing track of your question, Lorraine. How do I deal with it?
The difficulties and challenges, so that people who are listening to this, they might think that, oh, Jeanne has no challenges in her lives. No wonder she can be so loving and praising God. But that's not the case. We all, like you said, we all have something, tests, and from that, we grow stronger in our love of God and asking for love.
I think that, because I've been on the path 51 years, 52 years, if I, not even counting those early childhood experiences, if you're sincerely praying for divine love, you will reach maybe a threshold is the right word, where you have sufficient love in your soul that it grows exponentially and you get stronger, and it's like a snowball gathering momentum and size. And so while the pain is still there, the challenges and the tests are still there, there's daily confrontations between the mind and the soul. And I think with enough divine love and commitment that we will all get there eventually, no matter what detours we take, what tests we have, what misfortune might befall us. Once you have received divine love in your soul, you never lose it. And it will continue to grow and burn brightly.
Mhm.
And I mean, without Al, I wouldn't be where I am today. We are so fortunate to have each other, and that soul commitment and daily practice of prayer and commitment to this path. And retirement sure helps.
Yeah, well, it's obvious you have a knowing of,
Yeah.
of
And,
God's
and
love. And
the other thing is, sorry, go on.
I just wanted to say that even if people starting out have divine love, it will always grow, and they can always trust that they will have the support to deal with whatever problems come into their lives.
Mhm.
I was actually going to say something from on that subject too, Lorraine, that if you have received some divine love, that divine love can never be taken away from you. And that, I think, is such a lovely thought, that you never lose it as long as you use the love you've been given and give that out to people.
Yeah.
And you clearly have, Jeanne, in bucketfuls. And I mean, the other thing is this faith in God. Your faith is so sure and so strong,
Unshakable.
comes across.
Yes.
Yeah, that
Indeed.
comes across so clearly.
Yeah.
And we're all getting there together. It's being upheld by one another that I think makes all the difference. Like, I've always been this extreme extrovert, and in a way it's been kind of selfish, because I just draw on love and support from everybody. And it's magnified when we're in this together.
Yes, having that support, and I think we all just want to be loved.
Yeah.
And we can certainly feel that in this community of LightBringers. Yvonne and Beth, any other questions for Jeanne?
Well, can I ask my perennial question?
Oh, please do. Yeah.
What is it, Jeanne, that brings you the most joy in your life?
Oh, well, living with Al. He is a joy. He's a rock. He's steadfast. He's so committed, so loving, so devoted. And he's a man's man. Like, I just, anyway, he describes our relationship, he did a few years ago anyway, as the two of us being encrusted gemstones from the center of the earth, living our life together in a rock polisher, where we were polishing each other up. And I've often thought of that analogy and how true it is. We're both stubborn and strong-willed, and but yet it really
That's
works.
your joy. Oh, it's lovely.
Making up is really fun. Yeah.
Yvonne, anything more for you?
I'm good, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jeanne, Beth, and Yvonne. It's been a delightful time together. God bless you all.
God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.